welcome to the Green Sparks podcast. I am your host, Charlotte, and this is your go-to place for conversations about regenerative education. We share inspiring stories from our Green School community, along with expert insights, all aimed at nurturing a love for learning and living that makes positive differences in our shared worlds. Today, we are joined by Geoff Huskinson, who is an educator here at the Green School Bali, and we're going to dive into a conversation about student enterprise. Welcome, Geoff, to the Green Sparks podcast.
Thank you very much.
We ask this question to all of our guests to start. Could you please tell our listeners, who are you and what is your story that hopes to make a positive difference to our world?
Charlotte, I come from Ireland. I was born and bred over there. I grew up on a farm and spent my life around machinery and animals and being out in the fields. And I found that part of my upbringing some of the most valuable with regards to life experiences and my interest in nature. And having spent 15 years contracting and working in an environmental business in Ireland, we recycled organic waste onto land. So we used to take all the sludges from water treatment, and we used to take sewage sludge from the meat industry, the co-ops, the creameries, and we'd take that waste that historically was put into landfill or just fired into rivers years ago, finding a better way of getting rid of that in a way of recycling it onto agricultural land, giving people an organic alternative to artificial fertilizer. And after doing that for 15 years, I had been tapped on the shoulder by teaching all my life. And we decided to change. We went and traveled the world for a few years. I volunteered to teach in the south of England and taught there for 5 years. And Green School Bali was sort of on the horizon somehow. And through the diaspora of people we knew, one thing led to another. And I was brought here originally to run the biobus project by Pat Kyle, who set it up. And I said I didn't want to do that yet, because I wanted to come and teach science. And then when the phone went down, I thought, ouch, that looks like opportunity lost. And thankfully, the phone call came again 6 months later to say, we need a science teacher, and will you run the biobus?
Amazing. Yeah. Okay, so stars aligned for you there then. That's great. Now, you've already mentioned these words biobus, and that's really what I want to explore with you today, because it's so exciting and it's so successful, and it offers a really great example of what students, teachers, communities can all co-create that is good for the world. So for our listeners at home, maybe you could just speak to what is a biobus and where did this idea come from? Like, what was the spark for the biobus student enterprise?
It was 2015, the grade 12s. There's a great drive here to try and get our students to think about, what are you going to leave behind when you leave Green School? What are we going to remember you for? And there was a group in a homeroom with Pat Kyle, 2015, who just noticed that for all the chat about being sustainable and making a difference for the environment, we had a community of 300 and something students at the time, and they were driving in their individual cars from Ubud and Canggu, which is where our community were mostly based. And there was a stream of cars coming every morning and a stream going back every day. And they said, this isn't a sustainable way to transport our community. And surely we can find a way of doing it better. And someone came up with the idea of, we need a magic bus. And it just grew from there. The students came up with this idea and started to explore it, and Pat Kyle, being the educator he was, just facilitated taking it where it wanted to go. And it was focused on three main things, in that it was transport, community, and education. And the biobus really ticks so many of those boxes. It sort of has tendrils that spread out in so many directions. And it's been a lovely thing to have taken on after Pat Kyle left. But it's been an incredible journey, really. I can give you a little more about it. The idea of having biodiesel here in Indonesia, fuel is fossil fuel. I mean, there's no competition. There's a monopoly of fuel here, in that Pertamina is the only place you can get your fuel, and biodiesel doesn't really exist. And so it was a steep hill to climb to try and even get your hands on biodiesel in the first place. And here in Bali, we have a lot of cooking oil, and the students found out you can turn cooking oil into biodiesel, but we didn't know how to do it. And there were students driving around Denpasar on the weekends trying to find this mythical place that did biodiesel, that made biodiesel from cooking oil. And finally they found it. And so they made a partnership with this company called Lingasi Jiao, which is a yayasan. And so it started. They started making biodiesel, and we bought the buses, and it grew over the years, in that now we've got a fleet of 6 buses, an ambulance, a bio baby that we use for more local transport. We've had staff cars who come, and we set up the first B100 biodiesel petrol pump in Indonesia, opened by various government officials at the time as well. It was an incredible success story.
Wow, gosh. This sounds like it's involved so many people as well. I love this idea of the tendrils as well, of kind of crossing what we might consider to be disciplines of like community and science, teachers and students. Like it really is a kind of a flattening approach to making a difference to the world. And it is hugely successful. It's still going today. And like you just said, there's a fleet of 6 biobuses. But I know that won't have been without its challenges. Maybe for some people who might be listening, perhaps community members, school leaders, educators, maybe they're thinking about their transport options now. And whilst the biobus might not be the right solution for their community, maybe you could talk quite generally, but also specifically, place specific, about what the challenges have been for you, for the students, for the communities in kind of getting this off the ground and also maintaining it. Because that's not easy either, right? Correct.
I mean, it has been a journey. I came here in 2019, and even if you're trying to offer community transport, where your community is central to that. So there's the logistics, just trying to figure out where do our buses need to go to be able to serve the most of our community.
Yeah.
And back in its infancy, our community were almost on 2 streets, one in Ubud and one in Canggu. And of course, the island has changed. There's been huge development. People have had to move due to rent prices and just population density here. So our community is spread out much wider. And so figuring out just even the routes to be able to come and where do our buses need to go to get people. And that continues to be a challenge as people move further and further away. But that in itself was something that, again, the students did with surveying our community and getting people to feedback. Where are you? Where could we send a bus to get you on it? So there's that side of the biobus, whereby our students are actively going out and surveying and auditing our transport. Where are you coming from? Where are you? And how can we best serve you? And that continues weekly. The second side of it, of course, is just getting your hands on the biodiesel. And because the cooking oil on the island, I mean, there are millions of tons of cooking oil used across Indonesia every day. And and that's probably not true, but large quantities of it here on the island. And of course, one thing they'd spotted was that cooking oil here is, once it's used once, it gets sold and it gets used again and it gets sold and it gets used again and it gets all the way down this chain of this sort of black market of cooking oil. And that the cooking oil that's being used in some places is almost, it's unhealthy. It's not good for people. There's an argument of carcinogens in overused cooking oil. And so we were saying to these restaurants, if you give us your cooking oil, we will turn it into biodiesel and we'll be able to transport our community to school. But also that raising awareness of some of these social issues, these ideas whereby, yes, we understand that you're making money from selling the cooking oil on, but these are the consequences of it, and this is how you could make a better difference, so to speak. And so the students are out dropping in on restaurants, dropping in leaflets, emailing, they're having to communicate and cold call these people to try and get them to give something that has value to them, and to try and convince people why they should give it to us. And that again, all student-led, and that continues. But of course, the main thing that really has been a challenge for us is that we had a fleet of 4 buses at the time. And when COVID came, and with social distancing, you can't put people on a bus. And if there's one way to destroy a vehicle, don't use it, especially here in Indonesia. I mean, our buses were sitting stationary for months, almost a year.
Really?
And the issue that caused it was that effectively our buses became old and musty, and we had to try and when we were allowed to come back and the community came back again, getting people back into the buses when they had got used to being in single cars again.
Right.
So it was almost, I mean, we talk regenerative education, but the biobus almost went back to where it was after COVID, in that we had a similar problem, people back in cars, further spread around the island, and we had to try and get them back onto the buses again. And so that's been a constant process. And then, it continues. I mean, with regards to the education side of things, we look at the chemistry of fuels, and we look at soap making. We start looking at the combustion engine and the differences in putting different fuels in engines. So biodiesel is slightly more caustic, and as a result, it will wear away a lot of the gaskets and the parts of the engine that are more susceptible to more caustic fuel. And of course, our maintenance cost is an awful lot higher. And so we have to offset the fact that it is a more expensive business to run than a normal bus transport system, because putting biodiesel into buses does have an impact on your maintenance, and therefore it's a more expensive project to run than to try and compete with people who are just taking a private car. It's difficult. So getting our community to realize that, yes, it might be a slightly more expensive option, but it is making a difference. And if we're here to make a difference, this is one way you can do it. And the students own and lead and push that to our community, and it's very much in their hands. And it's just something I enjoy facilitating and helping them along with.
I love it. It must be so interesting to be a student in this class, because the learning is vast. I mean, making phone calls, I know for a lot of young people that can be quite scary. Learning how to write an email in a way that has like a professional tone and is also friendly. Just kind of getting your hands dirty with the vehicles and thinking about the oil, and it's just very hands-on. I love the sound of this. And like you say, it's worth doing, right, if it makes a difference. And it seems that it is making a difference. Let's think about the students now then. What do you think they learn about it? I mean, I've just said a couple of things, but you obviously have so many more insights. How is this a valuable learning experience for students? Maybe you could just say a few words about that, because this is science, right?
It is.
So what can you say about sort of science learning? But obviously a project like this also goes beyond science as well. Maybe you could say a few words about that. What do the students learn?
Well, I think the social aspect is an important part of it, in that students have to go out and deal with people. And there's a local community that we're engaging with, and raising the awareness of a situation in a community that other people may not feel is that big an issue. But being able to go and talk to people and explain what you're trying to achieve and getting people on board. And as you say, that side of it is the students get to go out there, talk to people, and try and convince them around to their way of thinking, and try and figure out how can this be a reciprocal thing. And they get dirty. They have to pick up these oil drums. They go around the back of these kitchens, the back of these hotels, and they're collecting oil and gathering it up. It's dirty work, and I think that's valuable. I think to go and see, you've got to go and see that aspect of the world. I took students to Surabaya to go and see a company called Metro Oil, who worked with Linggis Hijau, and to go and see a large-scale cooking oil conversion units there. And it was, they saw people working in conditions that shocked them, but also made them realize that this is real life for other people. But also that they went out, they were able to talk to people, meeting owners of restaurants, and using social media. And as you say, that communication aspect of it is a huge part of what biobus is doing. And also being aware of other people's situation. The fact that, yes, that cooking oil to the kitchen staff of a restaurant is their pocket money. It's, the bits that they get as a result of selling the cooking oil on. And you're turning up and saying, oh, give that to us and we're going to transport students to an international school in Ubud. They don't see that. They don't understand that. Yeah. So it's, as I said, there's an awful lot of tendrils to it.
Yeah,
but
it's really rich.
Yeah.
How about their sort of enjoyment or engagement in science? So if we think about the discipline of science now, I don't know how these biobuses work in terms of that scientific sort of content, if you like, or subject knowledge. But do you find that the biobus, having rolled their sleeves up, gotten dirty, spoken to lots of people, had these kind of really rich experiences in ways that they possibly have never imagined before, does this change or influence them in terms of science? And do you see that in any other ways, sort of back on the campus in other lessons? Like, does it help them to learn more about science? Does it transfer in other ways? What could you say about that?
I think, again, there's an awful lot of information gathering and processing that, in that when we're auditing our community, we'll get up early in the morning and count the cars as they come in, interview the drivers, how many people in your car, how many empty seats, and gathering data on what's now 200 and something cars coming to school every day. And how do we present that data? So taking that data, what does it mean? Like, first shot, how can we display this in a way that this community will understand, or will make it most impactful? So taking data, processing it, and how you then display that data, again, a valuable thing to be able to do. But also with regards to the more hands-on work that we do in the iHub and in the biolab, where we look at chemistry and physics. So mostly I like to teach a lot of mechanics. So we look at the mechanics of the engines, and we look at the mechanics of petrol engines versus diesel engines, and what are we actually doing, and why is it that a diesel engine can run on cooking oil, and being able to explain how that, the diesel engine was originally designed to run on peanut oil, but fossil fuels took over. And so there's also a class on that we do called Pump, which was based on a film from about 15 years ago, that looks at the fuel industry and the history of the fuel industry, and how did we get to be so dependent on fossil fuels, and what are the alternatives? And then to look at the environmental side of science, saying, well, this carbon-based oil that we can use as fuel is already in our ecosphere. It's already in our natural world. We don't have to dig it up. It's in plants. And being able to make oils that can run a combustion engine without having to dig it out of the ground. And so it's been a very nice conduit to be able to teach our students and show our students how we've got to be in the situation we are in, and what the alternatives are. And looking at ethanol, and looking at, we can make ethanol and distill ethanol and we ran a motorbike on one. But the students have physically done and seen that, and learnt how engines work at the same time. There are so many tendrils of education, and the great thing is if you keep listening to your students and they keep coming up with new questions, it can take you anywhere with regards to not just the biobus itself as a topic, but it's relevant to so many other things as well.
Absolutely. Oh, it makes me want to join your science lessons, Geoff. This all sounds super interesting. So I'm thinking about the community in terms of like parents, in terms of drivers, in terms of, you did speak a moment ago about the restaurant owners and the hotels, and then we've obviously got this wider community as an island or beyond, and it seems to me that the biobus actually kind of transcends many of these kind of mini and wider communities in terms of making a difference. And have you had any challenges getting any of these community members sort of on board with this student enterprise?
For sure. We tried to get the biobus to be used by our community for doing things like, if you're heading for going to climb a gung for the weekend, or if you want to go to Kintamani for the weekend, if you're going on a surf trip to Lombok, take our biobus. We'll load the boards up. We can take, and we can run it on biodiesel, and we can take you there. And you run into challenges here in Indonesia quite quickly with regards to licensing and the legal abilities to do things. Biobus is a school bus that is legally allowed to take students to and from school. And if it's seen to compete with the tourist industry or the tourist drivers, the water gets hot very quickly.
Okay.
And so we found that a challenge. We then also, during the holidays, with some of our donors and some of our people who were working with us, we gave our buses to transport people around Canggu from hotels to nightclubs or beach clubs. So that was a partnership that we worked with. But it's been quite difficult to get it out there. I mean, I would love the streets to be covered in biobuses here and to have biobuses running all across Denpasar. But it's tricky. It's tricky to get through a lot of the paperwork that is presented to you. And the students, again, historically, really pushing the government to try and work on B100 oil. They felt that trickiness in the legislation and the paperwork, and how do you get things moving with so much red tape?
And I guess there's that idea as well that if the biobus is used more widely, then that has a knock-on effect to the people whose employment is with cars and transporting goods and people. And so, as always, these issues are so complex, and it requires a lot of sensitivity to know what are the right decisions to make and who's going to be affected. So it's not simple, right?
Because families have a driver, and the driver becomes part of the family. You know, they're spending a lot of time with the kids. They're taking around at the weekend. So it's like, we're going to put our kids in a biobus. That man has a family.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not a decision one makes lightly.
Yeah.
So one has to be conscious of the social impact of our decisions.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky one. As we've come back from COVID and people have had their drivers through absolute necessity, it's difficult to make that transition again. But back where it was.
I suppose for anyone else listening who's thinking about the transport options in their school, they also have to make sure they're really engaging with community issues so that they might illuminate these tensions, which could obviously affect the long-term impact of such an enterprise.
It's funny, the students also spotted that, and they're saying, look, we can't get a biobus to everybody. There are people in Tabanan, there are people in Kintamani, there are people in Chamagi and Sese, that we've spread out so much. But what they interestingly did at the beginning of this year, they said, let's count the empty seats in the cars. Let's see how efficient are the cars actually being. And we found that just the cars that were coming in the morning had enough empty seats in them to actually transport the entire school.
Wow.
So we had 104, on the mornings that we did it, we had about 140, 150 students coming by car, and there were 300 and something seats spare.
Wow.
And so we're like, well, okay, what can we do about that? And they said, well, we should getting people to carpool. If we can't get the bus to you, fine, but if the biobus is driving to school and there are cars overtaking it with one student sitting in the back, you know, that's not great either. Fine, we can't get the biobus to you, but you can do a better job too.
Yeah.
And the students put it out and said, you should be carpooling in there. And there's a design of a carpool app. And we're getting the community to say, right, you give us your information. Where are you? Here is 3 other families that live near you. Share it. Like, for example, give your driver a day off. On Tuesday, he takes the 3 families. On Wednesday, he takes them. So you can trying to get our community to realize that even if the biobus doesn't give them a individualized personal solution or an option to contribute, you can still do other things. And I loved it that the kids were like, okay, well, if we can't get to them, what can they do?
Yes.
And
empower everybody.
Yeah, and sometimes there was a wonderful moment here in the high school assembly or the full school assembly where one of our students from last year put on a presentation that you could almost feel the community feeling embarrassed because he just didn't hold back. He said, "You guys are not doing this well enough."
Brilliant.
And you could see the parents were sort of slightly awkwardly looking.
Yeah,
it was great. Really good.
This is a really great time to pause because you've just raised an important nuance, I feel. For some of our listeners, they might not be confident with this term regeneration because they might be more comfortable or more knowledgeable about sustainability. And so for me, you've just spoken about carpooling, which I feel could be a sustainability measure. And then we've got the biobus, which is regenerative. Could you speak to the nuance? Like, what's the difference between sustainability and regeneration?
Oof. I find the term sustainability rather overused and not fully understood as to what it really means, especially you ask our students that. I think the idea of regenerative, and especially with regards to regenerative education, is that it changes. And as the dynamics change, then the lessons that need to be learned or the things that need to be done also change with it. So it feels more organic.
Well, I like to think of sustainability as a noun and regeneration as a verb. And so like what you're saying about the change, that's the verb, right? That's the doing. That is the transformation, if you like, that's taking place. And I know for a lot of schools, they do great things with sustainability. We've got recycling, we've got solar panels on roofs, we've got water conservation in bathrooms. Like, these are all brilliant. These are wonderful initiatives. They're examples of sustainability. And to me, they are operationalized. So the school is able to create some sort of a checklist or a manual, if you like, and they can walk around their school site, they can tick things off. And Green School has those things as well. There's solar panels here, there's compost toilets, like all of the operational sides of sustainability are here. And what we're really thinking about, especially with this podcast, especially with Green School, we need to be thinking about the conditions for more of life to reveal itself. And I feel that that is why the biobus is such a great example of regeneration, because you're taking a material that was about to be wasted, the oil, and you're using it in a way that creates this positive change, this transformation for the community. And so that's just one of many, and there are many stories on this campus of regenerative practices. And I just thought that was a great moment to pause, because you sort of made that distinction really clear. And so for our listeners now who perhaps work in schools or maybe in their households, they could think, well, is this an example of sustainability, the protection, the conservation? And of course that's important, but can we go beyond sustainability? Can we be regenerative? Can we create more life? And I think that's the kind of energy that we're sort of looking for in our worlds today. And I think the great example is the idea of, do you want to sustain your marriage, or do you want to constantly sort of shift and change and influence and evolve together? And that's really what the biobus is doing. And I love the way that you're responding as well to COVID and sort of the aftermath of COVID.
And the lovely thing about the openness of the curriculum here is you can then just take that and run with it with a student. And we've seen some lovely things happen as a result. Listen to your students and allow their ideas to sort of simmer, and you just support that and allow it to happen. Encourage conversation, connections with people, try and find solutions to these little questions that they come up with. And that's how the biobus popped up. Some students came up with a thing they saw was a problem, and Kyle just facilitated it, and it became what it has today.
Okay, well, we're going to bring this conversation to a close, but I've just got one more question, if that's okay, Geoff. What's the future for the biobus? Where is this going? What is the journey for this fleet of 6 buses, and how do you make sure that it continues to be sustainable for you, for the students, for the community?
Well, the biobus has been, it's been this great project at Green School. It's traveled the world, and it's done TED Talks, and it's won awards globally, and it's had a lot of recognition for it. But it's not as new as it was. It's not as innovative as it was at the time, and we have to look at other alternatives. With regards to our energy use and how we can be more efficient, there was a student a couple of years ago who started looking at the possibility of electric buses. And that then led down the viability and the environmental impacts of mining lithium, and how would we charge them anyway? And then set up with the turbine down on the river. We've got a vortex, which is a hydroelectric electricity generator that has at times run the entire campus and produced more electricity than we've ever used. How could we hook that up in order to run an electric bus? And if the buses, for example, don't need to be traveling as far, would an electric bus work? So the possibility of that remains, and we're pushing that along as students gain interest. We're hoping that there might be a greenstone on it again in the next couple of years. But where does it go from here? Biobus is, it remains in itself as an enterprise that still offers very much a lot of opportunities with regards to education and all the things we've spoken of. But where it goes next, I think we'll have to leave it in the hands of the students, fundamentally.
Yep.
That's where it needs to go to.
Mm-hmm. And what a great way to end our podcast, because really that is regeneration, right? That is being comfortable with these unknowns, not having these plans, not having everything forecasted, but being willing to adapt with the uncertainties of the day and to leave it with the students. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Geoff, for joining us and bringing your time and energy to this conversation. Well, thank you for joining us at the Green Sparks podcast. Make sure you follow us on social media. The details are in the channels below, and we'll see you next time.